Okay, all ready to go. So this is a quick presentation about the NCMAS, the process itself, what is happening there, and then going through the application form afterwards. Okay, so what's covered in this one? So the overview of the NCMAS process itself, and then also a few other things to consider. Then we'll have some time for questions. And after that, I'm just actually going to walk through the application form. Okay, so where do you need to go this year? They've actually changed their webpage. And so this one here is now your main link to the application form itself, but also all the information you need. So information for applicants, and there are actually some examples for a proposal and also computational details. Applications are open. They close on the 26th of October. Now this is Canberra time, so for us in Brisbane or in Queensland, it's an hour earlier. After this, there will be assessments, and then the actual allocation meeting is at the start of December. And then hopefully just before Christmas, the allocations will be announced. I'll show you later on when I go through the form, there's actually like an online course that you can do. They started that last year already. And it's actually quite interesting because there are quite often a few home truths in there that you might not think about usually. Okay, so the process. Information, details, requirements, they do tend to change every year. So if you've done it all before, read them again. So read the information carefully and make sure you don't miss anything. You have to observe the eligibility criteria for CIs and researchers. So not everyone is eligible to be CI. In a lot of cases, it's not advisable for certain people to be a CI. So check these particularly carefully. The big one is that you can only be a CI on one single application, and it will actually stop your application in its tracks if one of the CIs is on another application. So that hit me, and it took me quite a bit to get rid of that. I had to delete me basically. There are minimum allocations for each of the facilities, and there's also a maximum that's available in total per year on the facility. And weirdly enough, we have every year there are applications that ask for actually more than is available for the total of the year on a facility. And we also get a lot of applications that ask for an unreasonable proportion, like 20% of the total or something. So these are things you should consider when putting in a request in. There are additional conditions for most of the facilities. Guardi is possibly the one that supports the most, but all the others like Magnus and Massive and Flashlight have very specific conditions on the type of applications and software. When you're writing your computational details, all the hardwares are different. And so you have to tailor the resource requests and the description of what you're doing with it and what you're going to run to each of the facility and their particular hardware. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that most applicants make every single year. Also, to make sure you use the right application, make sure if you want to be an ECR, tick the ECR box or special consideration. Everything else will be in the open category, which is very, very, very competitive. Also, if you're doing an ECR, make sure you are actually eligible, and also that the fixed allocation on the single facility is enough for you. And then the other thing that's also crucial is that the CVs of all the CIs listed, because they're the only ones that will be taken into account. If you're only a researcher, it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter, but all the CIs really need to be up to date. Okay, what comes after the submission? Technical assessment comes first. So each of the facilities will have to assess all the applications that are asking for time on their facility. That's why I usually come in, because I'm doing the Flashlight ones. And so each of the facility has to look at what calculations the project is proposing, what software and things, and then see if the facility can actually support this. And quite often, and in a lot of cases, people don't do that. So they get, quite often I see a standard description of, I'm going to have this and this and this software, and I'm going to run all these calculations, but there's no mentioning of which calculations and which software is actually going to be run on Flashlight. And if the project is a mixture of MPI and other things, I say, sorry, can't support this. And that's where it goes down the hill. So you have to be very, very specific and give enough details for each of the facilities to work out if they can actually support the calculations you want to do with them. Usually our facilities have no say in the allocation process. However, if there is a question or if there is uncertainty, the facilities are usually asked to give an opinion if this project can be supported or not. Also, if a facility thinks that a project should be supported and they really would like to support it, even if the committee doesn't think so, there's always a possibility to talk to the committee, basically. So one of the things you really want to do is to get the facilities on your side. You want to be a good citizen. You want to show that your workflows are working, that you put in every effort to make your workflows and software work efficiently on there. And that's usually one of the best things you can do. To get this done, all facilities, if you don't already have an account on one particular one, all facilities offer test allocations. It's good to get these before you write your application or you submit your applications. However, it's also good once you submitted the application, just because you didn't have time before, to get one then and then actually get all this testing done. And so the technical assessments don't count into your score that is used then to rank proposals, but it will inform the assessors in the committee if the facility or if your computational details make any sense or not, or if the facility is actually appropriate, or what you're asking for is actually appropriate. And they will take that into account when they do their assessment. Once the technical assessments are done, the merit assessment will happen. And so each application is usually assessed by at least 2 committee members. And the more time you're asking, the more we'll look at it and assess it. Applications are assessed for project, investigators, feasibility, benefit and impact. The application form and the information will give you the percentages. And so usually the assessors will then score each criteria. In recent round or last rounds, they usually then would also give a suggestion for a possible allocation. And then these are all averaged over, which then ranks the proposal and then gives an average proposed allocation as well. Just like the ARC process, applications are ranked from A, which is the best, to E, which is bottom. And so we're a bit more lucky in the NCMAS scheme, while in the ARC applications in A will you hopefully be funded, maybe some in a B, but more unlikely. The NCMAS will actually look at applications ranked from A to C. However, a lot of the proposals will be ranked in the middle, basically, and I'm going to go through a bit more of the details later. Where a lot of the proposals fail to score, and I see this every year, is in the feasibility section, and that is your computational details. Because the facilities don't see how you're going to run these jobs. Well, they know if you've already got an account and things like this. But if you don't describe it well, there just can't be a good score on that. If you don't write it down and explain it in detail, no one will score you highly on this in the feasibility, basically. And so merit is very, very important, just like for an ARC grant. Your science and your research has to have merit. However, you also need to really show how that science relates to the calculations you would like to do. So there has to be a direct link of what calculations you're doing, what are they going to help you achieve with regards to your research and your research outcomes. And this is where you have to pay really big attention to. Now, the allocation committee meeting, so assuming that the process will be slightly different this year because it's all going to be online, it's going to be over 3 days. Usually they shut us all in a room for 2 days, from morning till late afternoon, and we just have to go through all of them. Usually, so that's from previous years, applications are usually discussed in order, so starting with the highest rank because they're usually the ones that are more easily funded, basically. There's not a lot of time, usually within these 2 days we had. It was about 2 to 3 minutes per application, so there's no big discussions happening unless something is seriously wrong and someone voices any concerns, or the reviewers, the assessors basically disagree severely on the score. So usually ranking and suggested allocations are just taken on board, and that's pretty much it. So as soon as you, like ARC as well, the top few might just get what they're asking for. Once you get into the lower ranks, the cutting will start, and the lower down you get, the worse it's going to get. And so why applications ranked in C will be discussed for funding. Most of them will be heavily cut or only get the minimum allocation, or they're not funded at all. And so that happens rather often. And in a lot of cases, it's the feasibility that's pushing an application from a B rank into a C rank. The other thing that usually hits people very, very hard, and that's still applicable this year, is that applications that cannot explain any underusage of their allocation in the previous year will usually feel that as a cut in the end. If you can't show that you're using it, so if you come this year as a percentage of usage that is 80% or 70%, and you can't explain why, they're not going to give you what you're asking for this year. Okay, so the bottom two, I'm not sure how much they apply this year because I'm going to talk about that in an extra slide. Asking more than you can show that you can use. Assessors actually don't see anymore what you've had last year, so that's going to be a bit of an interesting one. However, if you've used something if you've been given an allocation this year and you used about 90 to 100%, that's as much you can actually use, basically, unless your group and your dynamics and your application or the type of calculations are changing significantly, then usually that's what you should be good for asking for this round as well. Okay, I just want to quickly go through the facilities, not so much what they offer, but what you have to pay attention to for your application. So Gaudi, they do prefer MPI, and you have to show scaling, not per core, but per node. So if you're providing scaling data and if you're saying you're running over multiple nodes, you have to refer your scaling to a single node, 2 nodes, 3 nodes, and so on. It will actually support single and small core count calculations. However, you really need to show the merit of these and why you have to do this type of calculations. Isn't there any other program out there that would actually scale and more in the NPI category? Why are you using this type of software? The other thing which makes it very hard for small core count and for high throughput projects and calculations is that Gaudi doesn't allow array jobs. They do have a limit which is not feasible for the typical type of array jobs that, for example, we see here at UQ a lot. They will support IO intensive calculations, and then they also have some high memory nodes. They have 250 million service units available next year, and the minimum allocation is 500,000. So if you can't use that or show that you want to use that, then you can't actually apply. Magnus does not allow single core or part node usage. So if you put that in, that's a big problem already. And there's every year people who do that. You need to demonstrate that you can scale at least over 2, 3, if not more cores. So that's the absolute bare minimum that you need to show. The more, the better, basically. They've got 100 million service units, and the minimum allocation is 250,000. Okay, so massive is for data processing, analysis, visualization using GPU. And I have a very specific call out this year, and it's only for applications in neuroscience, neuroimaging, and structural biology with Crow-EM processing and machine learning. If you don't fall into that category, you can't apply this year through NCMAS for massive. Their availability is a lot smaller, so 2.5 million, and the minimum allocation is 50,000 service units. Flashlight, smallest one. Here, we don't really care about scaling, to be honest. Here, you really need to show that you can use, that you need high memory, so around 500 gigs or more, if possible, and or your calculations are IO intensive. So because they have the flash drives attached, which gets really fast disk usage. So you have to show you will use at least one of these. Doesn't matter if it's single core calculations, but if you can show that you need that amount of memory or disk, then that's good. 1.9 million service units, and a minimum allocation is 20,000. Okay, a word on scaling. So all the applications need to show that the codes scale to the number of cores you wish to use. And that's not for just homegrown codes, that's for any code. So if you're using 3 different or 4 different types of code, you have to show it for every single one of them. Copying data from a web page is not acceptable. It has to be for your own calculations. So wall time is not a good indicator of scaling or efficient usage. It is the service units, and that is because applications run differently on different clusters, and also you're charged differently. So for example, GPUs and high memory nodes are charged higher on Gaudi. So wall time is not the one you're after, it's the service units. And if you're saying what kind of core numbers you're going to use for your calculations, you will have to choose the core numbers that give you the smallest SU service unit usage. So if we're looking at the table here, number of cores, now you can't do that anymore, but just as the example, that's your wall time. And yes, the wall time is dropping really nicely the more cores I'm chucking at this one. However, the service units are different. So the service units are actually going down, but then they're going up again. And so if you're actually looking at the scaling, and that is basically this number divided by this number divided by this. So you're basically referring to your minimum core count, which is 1 here. And so you've got a scaling of 1.2 here and still a scaling over 1 here, which is good. So these two are scaling okay. This one is getting into an area where it's just not any good. So 0.7 is, to 0.8, 0.9 is still fine, but this one is just absolutely not acceptable at all. And so when you're looking at scaling, this is what you're looking for. You're not just looking at this, oh, my wall time is still dropping, so I'm still good. That is not being efficient. And so this is now a requirement for computational details. Computational details have to either in tabulated or in plotted form have to show the scaling and how your calculations scale on each of the facilities. So if you haven't started in collecting this type of data yet, you better get a go. Okay, so now comes the thing, how much can you ask for? And this is where things are going to be interesting this year. And that is because assessors will actually not know what you had last year. So what they will see is the percentage of your allocation you used. So 90, 100, 80, 50, whatever it is. And so there is actually a big chance for people to ask what they actually need and what they would like to see. But there's no free lunch at all for this. So I would be really, really careful in not asking too much. So be reasonable still, because assessors will very, very carefully look at the computational details and the merit, and now really will base their recommendation on this. So if you do not do a good job in the description of your calculations, it's not going to be helpful to you, and you will still not get what you're asking for, because they will still cut you. If you can't justify it, if you can't explain it, if you can't give the details for it, and they don't think that what you're describing is justifying of what you're asking for, you're just not going to get it. So there's a bit of a balancing act this year, but it will actually help some of the younger people and some of the projects that usually don't ask for a lot to actually get a pretty reasonable amount, I think. So there's a good chance. Try and make something out of that and see what you can do. But pay really, really good attention to your computational details and the merit of those calculations. One of the things that we also see every year is to ask for a very high proportion of what's available. So if you're asking for, say, 10 million or 25 million, would be 10%. 10 million is 4% of the total available, and that's actually quite a bit. And if you don't have an outstanding application, you will basically have no chance of getting it. Also, asking for a lot and not backing it up is not a good move either. So you should try and be reasonable in your requests. Of that, you can actually say, I will be able to reasonably use that with the calculations I would like to do and with the people I actually have on the ground available working on this. Just to drive this point home, last round, 73% of applications got time, which is a really nice percentage of successful applications. However, the percentage of what they actually got compared to what they asked for is pretty sobering, I think. And that shows you that if you're asking for a lot, yes, you will almost, if you're not an A application, you will be cut, and you will be cut severely. And depending on how you did your application, the more you will be cut as well. So asking for something that's actually reasonable gives you a much, much bigger chance to actually get what you're asking for. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm gonna stop this here now. I'll just stop the recording and then we can do some questions. Let's pause this. Okay, cool. Now, so when you go to that link that is given on all the emails and that I had in the other presentation, it gets you to this. No, it doesn't get you to this. Yeah, it does get you to this. Sorry, I have to log in again. Okay, so it then gets you, no, it doesn't. Okay. let's do this again. There, that one. Cool. Okay, so that's where it gets you. And so the biggest change is now that the application, so the proposal and the computational details have to be written in anonymous style. I'm not going to say too much on that. I leave that. So you can actually submit your proposal for compliance check there, and I strongly advise everyone to do that. It doesn't have to be a perfect proposal, even if it's just a draft form, to get you some feedback. And the deadline for that is Monday next week. So that's the 12th of October. So this web page has quite a bit of information. So you get your information for applicants here, which is this one. Yeah. So there's the usual stuff in here, and I suggest very, 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 very strongly that you actually read this, because there is quite a bit of new information in there. And I realized I hadn't read it properly when I hit the application form, and I actually went back and dug it up and actually had a look and found that it was actually all in here. So that gives you the total available times, description of the actual facilities with links to them, who to contact, early career researcher categories, instructions on how to apply. I actually quite like these ones. Proposal length, what you're asking for. So if you're asking for a lot, you have to write a lot more. Computational detail length. So that's adding about 5,000 words for computational details, which is approximately 10 pages. So that sets expectations rather high on what you are expected to supply. Eligibility criteria, a few things on how to write it in the anonymous style. And then ORCID is now a requirement. It's actually rather easy. So I did it and it's pretty nice actually. So it actually just works. So here's your project quality, 40% investigators, 20% on feasibility. And that's a reasonably high percentage to really drop an application in the rankings if you don't do this properly. More on a proposal. And the nice thing is that actually, go down to the end, they have quite a long frequently asked questions session, which is structured into different ways, questions, types. So have a look in there as well. There's quite a bit of information in there. Oops. So that's the information. Then there's an application form outline. And that's going more about actually different things that you have to fill in, declarations and all sorts of things. Then they do have a sample proposal and a sample computational details. Now there's the sample proposal. Come on, go on. That's a sample proposal, and there they've basically highlighted with the comments of what should be changed. So this is actually an application that's usually ranked rather well. I don't understand the science at all. But that's a reasonable length proposal. And they also have a sample computational details. And as I said, this project does their computational details rather well. So this you can take as an example of what you can't put into the computational details, so what to look out for, but also on maybe how you might want to present your computational details and descriptions of algorithms and software. As you can see, there is a lot of detail in this one. Okay, so ORCID use is now mandatory. You do that when you update your CV through my NCI, basically, and it worked straightforward for me. So, and it sorts them really nicely in years and things like this. So it's good. I recommend everyone to do this one. This is just a short training course, which is quite fun, I think. There's a few interesting pointers in there, which make me smile every year, and some of them I do get wrong, so that's all right. Any questions on the NCMAS process, please write to here. Don't write to the help@NCI help desk or the PAWSI help desk. This is the one you want to use for anything NCMAS related. Okay, now this one here. If you now click on My Application, that gets you to a page that shows you applications where you are a CI on or lead CI. So they're my QCIF ones that don't matter. I've got this one is from last year, this one is for this year. I had these two, and I was a CI on a proper grant. I could not get past clicking this, basically. It completely stopped me in my tracks, and it stopped my supervisor or group leader to put or start looking at their application as well. So being a CI on only one proposal has been a criteria for years. This year, they're basically enforcing it in a way that you actually can't get past. So if you can't get past this starting an application, you have to find out if you're a CI somewhere else. Okay, so the other thing is here you can request the compliance check, and as I said, it's only available until the 12th of October, and I urge everyone to actually do that. Even if you're not finished yet, if it's not polished yet, just put it in just to get some feedback, because it is a compliance, and if you're found non-compliant, you have to, I think you get an opportunity to fix it rather quickly, but if you're not compliant, your applications will not be eligible and will not be considered. Okay, so if you want to renew an old project, you will pick the one that you did last year that you always have and then start your application. If you're new to this, you will click here and create a new project. And that will take you through similar hoops. Basically, I'm going to do this one here. Okay, it's actually nice and descriptive, giving you quite a bit of information. So make sure you actually updated all your CVs and everything in my NCI. And there is a handy link to do that. Then you actually have to tick that and that you're eligible to be a CI, basically. You either have to hold a substantive paid position, or eligible for ARC and NHMRC funding, and so on. So you have to be at an eligible institution. Cool, good. Now you can manage the people who are on there, so you can add or remove people from the project. So everyone who's on it should be listed here. For me, it's just me at the moment for this test one. And then you can also change the number of active users here. And that's an important thing as well. Don't have any old people hanging around. Really just put the people on there that will actually use the project next year. Okay, now you have to choose which category. So most people will go into the open. Special consideration and early career have eligibility criteria attached to them, so you need to check that this works. If you have a DECRA, you can tick that, and usually if you do a reasonable job in doing your application, and if you actually have a grant, you usually get that allocation. It's the minimum on one facility. So on Garda you get 500,000, on Magnus 250. If you're doing that for flashlight or massive, so massive is 50 and flashlight is 20. So you can only apply for one machine, and you will only get a fixed amount, which is the minimum. So we're going to go for the open one. Okay, now upload a single PDF that includes the research proposal and the computational details. And again, you can request that compliance check. Upload something and ask them to check, please. I do offer to read applications every year from QCIF members. I will not check for the compliance. If I see something I think points to you, I will tell people. However, I will not do a compliance check. This is what you need to do to be sure that your application is compliant. Now, they give actually some nice information here, and I really like this. So a few pointers on the anonymous writing style, research proposal as well, what should be in there, and the computational details. Now, this hasn't really changed. However, here says scalability on each nominated facility. Scalability should be for single node performance, not single core. Excuse me. Workflows, resources, typical job configuration, expected wall times, storage, algorithms, how they relate to the parallelism, clear justification for use of supercomputers, things like high throughput workflows and why they are required, why you're doing your calculations like this. And if you had any low efficiencies, you need to explain these as well, because the technical assessment will pick up on this. And it's good if you can explain why that is. So they're actually giving quite a bit of info here. Now, I haven't attached anything, and I'm just realizing I might be able to. So if I want to go next, it doesn't let me. Yay, I'm stuck. You actually have to attach something. Now, this PC. Desktop. There you go. I can use this one. All right. Yay, and now you're getting past it. So you actually have to attach a proposal. If you're doing this just to get past this point, please make sure you attach the correct one before you're submitting. Every single year, there's at least one, if not more, that forget to attach the proposal, attach the wrong file, and if that happens, there's nothing the committee can do. If the administration check will see that, and they will usually try and contact researchers if there is no file attached, and you have a very short window to fix that. However, if it gets to the committee and the technical assessments, there's nothing to assess, which means your application is ineligible, and that means they can't do anything about it. They can't give you anything. And so we actually had committee members happening that to them, basically sitting in the meeting, realizing their application could be assessed and they wouldn't be getting anything. So it happens every year to at least one, if not more. So please make sure before you submit that everything that you need to attach is there and it is the correct one you actually want to use. Okay, so HPC experience. general overview, systems used, and that is if you did not receive an NCMAS grant. So if you don't already through a previous grant, you will have HPC experience. If you haven't had one, you have to describe what you have. Don't have to fill that one in. Now resources. Resources go in service units. Again, they give you the total time available, and they also give you the minimum requests here. And then you have to basically request whatever system you want for, put in your requested resources as K as use, and then you have to put in a justification for the requested amount. And this is important. So why do you want this? So this is outside of your proposal and your computational details. This is justifying again why you're requesting what you're asking for and how that relates to your research. Also, if you're asking for more, you should justify that. Underutilization, so if you know you've used less than 100%, then it should be explained here. And try and come up with something reasonable. I mean, every year, everyone will have a good reason with COVID and other things. So, but be reasonable. Give some details of why it didn't work, basically. So just saying, oh, COVID didn't help is not enough, I think, because everyone will be doing it this year. And I just found the question. I'm going to answer that in the question time. Okay, so let's see if I can get past this. No, I don't. Okay, so there's a few things in here where you actually have to put something in. Let's put something in. Oh, that's the wrong keyboard. Okay. That one. And this one is optional. So if it doesn't say optional somewhere, you actually have to put something in. No. And it's actually telling me I didn't ask for enough. I like this one. There you go. Now here, each of the software packages you're going to use. So put in the name, the vendor, license, and you have to add all of them. So if you're using 10 packages, you've got to put 10 packages in, basically. And that is for the facilities to see if they do have that installed, if it can be installed, if they know that the software runs well on their facility or not. And that is to help that technical assessment to assess your application appropriately and to say, yes, we can support this. Yes, this will run efficiently. If you don't give that information, they can't do that. Okay, funding, and this is the annoying bit, as every year, is like having to put your grants in, basically, one after the other. Now, there's an important bit to that. If you're putting in a grant, say if you're working for a larger center, lead CI, but there are other people in the center and the center has some funding, and there's a grant for the center with other people as CIs, which is kind of supporting your research as well. But none of the CIs on this NCMAS proposal is actually a CI on that particular grant that is funding the center. You cannot put it in. You can only put grants in where CIs of that NCMAS applications are actually CIs as well. So at least one of the people in the NCMAS application have to be a CI on that particular grant. Otherwise, you can't put it in. Some further information as well. Okay, progress report. Okay, so this is where you put in what you used your time for in 2020. Productivity, what came out? What did you do? So this is a description basically, and then you can add publications here up to 15, and they're the highlights, and that's from 2018. So here you just put the ones in that are directly related to your research in 2020 for the usage of your time. And here you can put in from 2018 any highlight publication. Now, publication was supported by NCMAS grant. If it was, put it in, don't forget it. I think it wasn't last year, it was the year before, there was quite an uproar in the committee at some point, and that is because someone actually checked. A lot of people claimed publications as NCMAS publications, and someone actually took the time and checked every single one of them and found that quite a lot of them had not acknowledged NCMAS at all. And so that wasn't a particular happy time at all. So make sure when you're doing publications and the facilities were involved or any computations to acknowledge them appropriately and then to claim them here as an NCMAS publication. It is important that for work you do and for time you're given, you can show output, and that means that you really should have publications that acknowledge the facilities. Okay. Now you actually have to give consent to the trial of anonymizing research funding proposals. If you don't consent, you can't submit. So you actually have to consent to this. Yeah, there you go. So that's the review process. So you can see what you did, check before you submit that the one you actually want to attach is there, what you're requesting. See that everything is there. Do your compliance check. You still have to take our understand and want to submit before you do that. If you hit that button, that's it. There is no, in previous years when you made a big mistake or you realized something was missing, you could write to NCMAS and say, hey, please, can you unsubmit, if it was before the deadline, can you unsubmit, I forgot something, I did something wrong, I would like to fix it, and that was possible. This is not possible this round. If you hit that submit application, that's it. It cannot be unsubmitted, you can't fix it. Yes, you can provide an addendum basically to it, but maybe not. So another thing where this one is good is if grants are announced after the submission deadline, but before the committee meeting, you can write to NCMAS and say, oh, I've got this ARC grant, I've got the NHMRC grant, I've got this fellowship, I've got this grant, or I've got these 2 Nature publications or this really important publication. So you can do that writing to NCMAS and put in the change basically. So that will usually be considered if it is before the meeting. Okay, so this is this one. So I'm gonna stop this recording.